Alright, Godlings, another funny kid story time. And again, no teeth, but hey, we'll get through this. But no, funny kid story time. Okay, once upon a time, my son was young. We had a cat named Stanley. Now, my son growing up didn't really bother the cats at all. He barely knew that they were there. He just didn't interact with them at all, and he didn't have to. He didn't, but that's cool. So I didn't think he'd notice. So when Stanley got sick and he passed away, well, he got sick and we had to have him put to sleep because he had, it was feline leukemia or something like that. And we couldn't keep him from infecting other cats, so he had to be put to sleep. But it was like 3 days, and I'm thinking, you know, my son probably wouldn't notice it all, but well, after a few days, he did. I was like, oh. But he asked, he's like, what happened to Stanley? I'm like, oh. And I'm thinking, my mind's racing. I'm like, how am I going to explain this to my son? Because he was young. He wasn't quite old enough to understand death. But I was like, well, I'll figure out the best way I can explain it, right? But he saved my skin right at that moment. He didn't even know it. Because he's young. He's like, I don't know, 5, 7, something like that. He was young. But what happened to Stanley? But then, before I could say anything, he says, did he go to Pittsburgh or something? I'm like, yeah, yes. Stanley went to Pittsburgh. And I'm like, whoa, Saved by the Bell, right? So then I figured out any other animal that passed away, they go to Pittsburgh. But then I was like, well, geez, man, I hope I don't have to go to Pittsburgh anytime soon. I'm driving with my son. I can see it now. He's like, hey, that's Pittsburgh. Let's go stop and see Stanley. But then, so I told him the story. He forgot about it, right? But I told him the story later on. He was like, I don't know, 16. Like, I don't know, 8 years later, something like that. A long time, right? He's like, well, how long did I believe that? I was like, well, till now. I mean, if he was a little bit older, I would have explained it to him. But he figured out after a while, like, Santa Claus shit, right? So if they're too young to understand about death, just tell them. They went to Pittsburgh or Timbuktu or, just tell them that. They went to, until they're older. I mean, seriously. I mean, if they're old enough to understand, tell them. But if they're not old enough to understand, tell them they went to somewhere like Timbuktu or Pittsburgh or not New York City because too many people go there. All right? It's got to be somewhere you don't know about. That's the funny story time.